I guess the first thing I want to touch on here is from the outside, it would be very easy to read this as a fifth choice type of hiring. Like, we wanted all these other guys and that didn't work, so now we're going to Dan Quinn. Do you have any sense as to whether that was the reality or actually how it went down? That they struck out with Ben Johnson and anybody else they wanted, and Dan Quinn is like, all right, I guess he's okay.
It does seem like Ben Johnson was their top target, and they were obviously, I think, would have hired him if he had the interest, if maybe his contract demands were more in line with the standard of the rest of the coaching market. I'll say this. The thing we always hear about Dan Quinn is how he can build out a great staff. People want to work for him. He can get offensive coaches to come work with him, give them a lot of power. Of course, went to a Super Bowl with, maybe because of, Kyle Shanahan with the Atlanta Falcons. So I will say this. I think you and I have talked about this. I'm obsessed with the idea now of these coordinators that don't want to go elsewhere. Steve Spagnuolo in Kansas City, insert names here. There's a report that came out from Pro Football Talk about Chip Kelly and maybe coming. I know some people might say, oh, his NFL tenure was terrible. I feel like we've retconned that. He took over a 4-12 Andy Reid coached football team and went 10-6 2 years in a row. Now, did he run this kind of like weird program with a lot of nutritional stuff, and he gassed out his defense, and because they ran so up tempo and kind of was trying to be too college? Yeah, maybe. But the thought process to me there is, you bring in a good offensive coach that I don't think wants to go back to the college ranks. I don't think is going to get an NFL head coaching job again. So maybe the thought process is this is at least above average to good offensive mind, and he's not going to leave for the rookie contract of this quarterback. So underwhelming, I think it's fair to say. Quinn's defense, obviously, the last game we saw him play, they got absolutely demolished by the Green Bay Packers. They had a terrible game plan coming in, just playing a bunch of 220-pound linebackers against 12 personnel at Green Bay, and just got killed. But I do think I want to wait to see how the full staff builds out. It does raise the floor, all those things. It's just underwhelming because I thought you could have tried to shoot the moon here, get an offensive mind, pair him with the number 2 overall pick quarterback, and see what you have.
It is. I mean, it's kind of going against the grain, if nothing else, in terms of the trend right now to get the new young name, the head coach, and everyone else is sort of staying away from the retreads. Like Mike Vrabel didn't get a coaching job this time around. Bill Belichick couldn't get a coaching job this time around. Okay, those are maybe more complicated by the level of control they want and all those kinds of things. Pete Carroll as well. But the league has not jumped back into bed with guys that have sort of given it a shot, haven't had their success. Have sort of failed the first time around, I guess, quote unquote, and then gone and rebuilt their reputation as a coordinator somewhere else. They're going for the next young guy, and instead the commander is with, remember, this new owner, this guy who hasn't done it before. This is his sort of first cycle doing all this kind of stuff, have gone with Dan Quinn from a division rival. So it's an interesting hiring, if just because it's going in the other direction to everybody else at the moment.
For sure. And I think that's also where you have Mike Macdonald in your backyard. Obviously, he's in Baltimore. You're in Washington. If you were going to go defense and maybe struck out on some of the offensive minds you wanted, and again, maybe he wanted to go to Seattle. We don't really know the full dynamic, but then go full court press on that. Go after the best defensive play caller probably in football this year. Maybe again, Steve Spagnuolo could have an argument there, but do that. And I know the staff is always a huge part. I think that may be scaring some folks with Macdonald, but it sounds like Ryan Grubb, who was the Washington Huskies OC this past year. Yes, that offense isn't really an NFL offense, but I think he's shown he can build an offense around the talent that they have, probably help develop a lot of the talent that they have. I mean, 3 legit top 100 pick receivers probably. Of course, Michael Penix's career resurgence. So that would be an exciting hire to me if he goes back to Seattle, which it sounds like he might. But yeah, it is against the grain. We had 5 defensive head coaches get jobs this year out of the 8 openings. So, as much as people talk about the whole ideal outcome being going offense, obviously Carolina has stuck to that idea. They're very at the forefront of just wanting offense. They go with Dave Canales, but still not the norm, or at least not the most hirings in this cycle. So, yeah, it's just, like I said, it just comes back to being underwhelming. I don't think it's a bad hire. I just think it's a bit underwhelming given what things looked like. The last piece for me is, I do think with Josh Harris, you have this new owner syndrome, which is these guys come in, they want to win right away, especially you're building a new stadium, you're trying to restore the brand of the team. Maybe that scared off some of the younger coaches where they thought, look, this roster isn't any good. I do want to be winning by, year 2, year 3 perhaps, but is he going to go spend the most of anyone in free agency? Are we going to use these top 500 picks and try to? Is he going to think that I should be winning? Going 500 or better in the first year, which again is always the goal, but maybe it's unrealistic. And I wonder how long Dan Quinn's leash is. Like if things are a disaster this year, is it just a one and done? And Harris quickly pulls the trigger on a different direction.
The coaching staff thing that you brought up before is fascinating because if you look at Dan Quinn's staff, the last time he had the head coaching job, it was awesome. Like now, okay, part of that is because you had Kyle Shanahan, and then you essentially had the Shanahan tree, right, as part of this whole thing. Shanahan comes with his list of disciples. So it's a little bit like that Washington coaching staff in 2013, right, where look at all these guys that were on the same staffs because, yeah, they were all there with Shanahan. Most of them were still there in Atlanta when he was the head coach. They lost, I think, McVay at that point, but both LaFleur's were there. Mike McDaniel was there. But also on the defensive side, Jeff Ulbrich was there as well. Jeff Ulbrich is now the defense coordinator for the Jets, who have had a really good defense as well. So there's at least evidence that the last time he had this gig, he hired some really smart people. Even if you just isolated it to, hey, the man brought Shanahan in there on the offensive side, which is a pretty huge thing. That got an MVP season out of Matt Ryan. So it will be interesting to see what kind of pull Dan Quinn has to assemble this coaching staff and, if it can be a really good one. Because I feel like, we had Dan Quinn on the show quite a while ago now, but like he sounded like somebody that had learned a lot of lessons from the first time around, right? It's not an easy gig at all, and you're not going to have the answers to some of these things until they happen, and if they happen against you, you're probably going to get fired. So I think there's definitely merit to guys getting a second shot at it if they demonstrate, look, we're a good head coach, or we're a good coach, period. We can hire, which, as we've talked about before, is one of the biggest things. Can you identify coordinators, position coaches, bring them in, hire a good staff, and then have answers to some of the things that went wrong the first time around?
And I think especially with how you failed the first time, there was no, from the rest of his staff or the front office or the players that he failed because he ostracized the building.
Right.
I'm kind of alluding to like a Josh McDaniels here. Like he didn't fail because he was, not the most liked guy. I think he is like one of the most liked guys around the entire NFL. Like you said, you just learn some lessons, you adjust, you get better. And I do want to say, you shouldn't always just hire a 35-year-old offensive coordinator. It's not that simple. So yeah, I really don't think it's the worst hire in the world. There is certainly upside potential here. Again, with how the offensive staff shapes up, sounds like he might bring some guys, over from Dallas too. If he can get, Al Harris to join him as defensive coordinator instead of staying in Dallas, by all accounts, that would be a slam dunk defensive coordinator. I could be wrong, but I think he also had Raheem Morris in Atlanta for a stretch. So, we've listed like a half dozen head coaches that were on his staff. So, yeah, clearly he knows what he's doing there. And from that point, it could be positive. It's just, we just thought this was the most attractive opening in the world, and they were going to get this awesome pairing with Ben Johnson and Drake May, Jaden Daniels, whatever. Not the case, but I don't think it's not a bad hire in my eyes.
And it's also, we don't know, the reports have been everywhere with that Ben Johnson thing. Like we have no real idea whether they really wanted Ben Johnson and Ben Johnson didn't want the job, or they didn't want to go where he wanted in terms of finance or whatever, or simply Ben Johnson was just one guy that was on their list of people to talk through and it never made it as far as, this is our candidate that we really want to zero in on. There is all kinds of propaganda being fired out from both sides of that in terms of the insider reports. So who knows what the dynamic there was. But if it is, they desperately wanted Ben Johnson, then obviously having to settle for your fallback guy is not ideal. If it wasn't, though, then it might have been the guy they wanted all along. It is just an against the grain type of hire.